Earlier this week, Georgia Governor Nathan Deal signed into effect House Bill number 60, which is the Safe Carry Protection Act, and that's going to come into effect July 1st. And amongst many of its provisions, it's allowing anyone with a concealed carry license to carry their weapons into bars, churches, school zones, government buildings, certain parts of airports, and thinking of kind of churches and bars. They can say, okay, we're going to put a sign up saying we don't want any concealed carry weapons in our bar. So they do at least have that minimal protection. But in Georgia, there's about 500,000 or 500,000 people who have concealed carry permits, who will now be able, or at least on July 1st, will be able to walk into bars with their guns, thinking that they might feel a bit safer and that they might be able to protect themselves. It's roughly about 6% of Georgia's population now who could potentially start a shoot-up in a bar or a church at any moment. So, like, what are your guys' opinions on it? I mean, I assume most of you are going to say this isn't going to make Georgia any safer.
I want people to explain to me. I want our viewers to explain to me, how this is going to make you safer, and how is your Second Amendment threatened? How do people actually think that the Second Amendment is under attack here in America when the NRA is pushing these bills? It's almost rubber stamped from some of the ALEC legislation, which is definitely backed by the NRA and definitely backed by the gun manufacturers. How could people say here in America that our constitutional Second Amendment right is under attack when you have laws being passed like this? The NRA has won. There is absolutely no threat of gun control ever happening, despite background checks being incredibly popular. Background checks are popular. These kind of bills, they are not as popular, and yet they are getting passed over and over. States like Tennessee, states like Georgia, they're passing these kinds of laws. Where does it end? I don't know where it ends, and it's ridiculous.
Well, it's important to point out that, first of all, this bill that passed, House Bill 60, this was a watered-down bill. The group Georgia Carry that was lobbying in favor of this bill, they had kind of some qualms about it being watered down to the state that it's already in. So they wanted this even stronger. They really did want guns everywhere, and this has already been labeled the Guns Everywhere bill. And that's your fact about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was there so that in case the people needed to rise up against a dictatorship or whatever, they could have their gun at home and rise up and fight. It doesn't mean that you can be taking your gun into a bar and stuff. I mean, the supporters of this bill, they were saying it's going to help people protect their families, when they're out in public property and out and about, and now when they're in bars and stuff. How are you going to protect first of all, while you're taking your family to a bar, that just seems a bit ludicrous in and of its own sense. And then taking
sometimes bars have really good pizza.
Maybe I'm thinking of kind of all the seedy bars and stuff that I go to. But taking a gun to church, I cannot think. Why would you need to? Even if you wanted to, and you say, I've got the right. Now this bill has been passed, I can take my gun to church. Why would you want to? Why would you need to? It just doesn't make any rational sense.
Because tyranny and freedom. That's why. America.
Yeah, it's this common Republican ideology that's becoming more of a thing where it's like, oh yeah, we need more guns so we can be safer. It's absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, it's called the Guns Everywhere bill. I think I was reading an article and it was also saying that the establishments could also restrict it to a sense where it's like, hey, we don't want you to bring your gun in, so you can't do that. So I think that was one of the other provisions to help against people just bringing in guns.
So with that in place, the common argument of where gun-free zones are places where you can shoot them up, right? And that they want to stop and get rid of these gun-free zones. By allowing these places to say that, no, we don't want guns there, you're creating gun-free zones. You haven't solved the problem. You've created more problems with these bills.
Well, there were that's a kind of a ridiculous point. There are more gun-free zones if you don't allow them to carry these buildings everywhere. What that exemption says is that you, as a private property owner, have the right to say, I don't want you to bring your guns into my place, and I think that's perfectly reasonable. You guys know that I'm actually in favor of a lot of these bills in general because I don't really think it makes that big of a difference. I don't think it's going to lead to more mass shootings. Might lead to more accidental shootings, some more spontaneous shootings, but like I said, there are certain, like I've said before, there are certain trade-offs where you allow open carry. Like you get more of accidental shootings, more probably spontaneous shootings. I don't know about that, but you get less of other crimes, like muggings go down, like certain things change. So I'm in favor of this as long as it respects the owner of the place's private property rights. If you're an owner and you don't want people bringing in guns, and this law doesn't force you to allow them to do so, then I'm perfectly fine with that. Like, well, I don't think it's like this insane idea.
Just to be clear, I do agree with the principle of these owners saying that they don't want guns in their areas. I'm just going to I was just talking about the simple point of where, you know, they're talking about how gun-free zones are terrible, but go ahead and make your place a gun-free zone.
But let's not forget as well.
Why wouldn't they put why wouldn't they take that exception out and say, no, you must allow your Second Amendment right? You might as well just go balls to the wall if you're going to pass a law like this.
Well, you know, let's think about the kind of the mindset of these people who are like, yeah, I can take my gun everywhere. You know, so they go for a night out on the town with their friends to a bar or whatever, and they see the sign on the bar saying, we do not allow concealed carry weapons in this bar. This guy can kind of, I'm just trying to get into the mindset of these sort of people and go, screw that, I have my Second Amendment rights. I'm going to walk into this bar and kind of carry my concealed weapon anyway. The bar owner doesn't know that he's carrying a concealed weapon because it's concealed. That's the whole point of having a concealed weapon. And so people will still be most likely ignoring these signs that private property owners will be putting up. And I think Sean's point is right, that this may stop, you know, some muggings, but there's going to be more shootings. There's going to be more deaths related to guns because of this bill. It's just inevitable.
Well, the more guns, the more gun crimes, right? And guns are pretty good at killing people, you know, in the wrong hands or even in the right hands. They're good at killing people. That's what they're made for. So you're going to have, like, I'm uncomfortable, I think, with the trade-off of saying, okay, so there's going to be a few less, you know, petty crimes, which is great. You don't want petty crime, but murders are going to go up. Well, I'd rather be less murder. Maybe I'm crazy.
Well, it's the possibility of more shootings, like not necessarily murders could go up because some guy could go drag a woman out into his car and like murder her in his car without a gun. But like if you have a little more fear, this is their argument. If you have a little more fear that woman has a concealed carry, then you might not want to attack her, right? So it's really like that you have to get into when like the statistics come out for this, but what I was saying is that this law, basically every bar in all those places are quote-unquote gun-free zones, right? So the conservative argument is that criminals who want to commit crimes will ignore the law. So they're giving the bar owners and all these people the opportunity to allow guns in there so that you'll have less gun-free zones. Like it doesn't actually increase the aggregate amount of gun-free zones. It's just they're trying to reduce them, but they're also trying to respect the private property rights. It's like you have a First Amendment right to protest, but you can't protest in my fucking living room. I'll throw your ass out. Like, that's what the counterbalance is here.
And that's sort of a good point, because a lot of the argument is that the Second Amendment shall not be infringed, shall not be impeded in any way. All of our you know, rights are sacrosanct, when there actually are limits, and certain limits are acceptable. And we've gone the complete opposite way to say, and this is where the NRA and the gun manufacturers and the politicians that profit from them come from, is saying, no, that this has no limit. There is absolutely no limit on my Second Amendment right. I will not stand for it.
Well, this is kind of, I mean, my final thing to say is that with the First Amendment right, you have kind of the limit in place that you can't kind of shout fire in a crowded theatre. That's kind of one of the limitations towards it. And with the Second Amendment, you should have the limitation that you can't bring a firearm to a theatre. It just you've got to have those limits. And the fact that the NRA is now, or they have been for a number of years, just saying, no limits, take guns wherever, you can just shoot whoever you want now, it's just ridiculous.
No, there are limits. You can't just shoot people. Those are limits. And by the way, that fire in a crowded theater, everybody references that. If you look at that case, that's a bad ruling. Like, it ruled that some guy can't hand out anti-war stuff during World War I. Like, that's a shitty ruling. Like, it's a good saying you shouldn't be able to yell fire in a crowded theater, but that particular case was bullshit.
And speaking of course, bullshit cases, you had, what was it, DC versus Heller, which in 2008, that's what actually affirmed your Second Amendment right to being able to defend yourself with a firearm. Before that, there were lots of challenges to say that, hey, look, and it was affirmed by the Supreme Court that you could put certain limits on the Second Amendment. Like, you couldn't have, like, a shotgun or something like that used as home defense because, and I forget the specific ruling that was back in the 30s, back when they actually had more gun control than they do now. And back when the NRA was actually interested in gun safety instead of making more money for, you know, the gun manufacturers who just want to sell more guns.
That's actually kind of a red herring too, because the original case where they ruled that they could restrict gun rights was Plessy versus Ferguson, because that was one of the arguments against black people being the same as white people. I might have the wrong case, I'm pretty sure, but that was one of the arguments. Like, what if these guys carry guns? So that was one of the things that they ruled, that you could give people less rights. So, like, it is technically true that they never said that the court never said you had an individual right until DC versus Heller, but, like, every Bill of Rights is an individual right.